The Accidental Prime Minister, Chapter 10. Don't Stop Me Now. It was a short drive from Downing Street to Buckingham Palace, but it was just long enough to be given a pep talk by Jenkins. It's important you know a few rules about how to behave when in the company of the Queen. Bow from the neck, not from the waist. Call her Your Majesty the first time you meet her, then call her Ma'am. Remember, it's ma'am that rhymes with jam, not ma'am that rhymes with arm. Never turn your back on her, or she'll karate chop you in the kidneys. AJ laughed, as did everyone else in the car. No. Stick up her fingers in a very rude way, Joe joined in. Ugh, what's the point? Relax, Jenkins. We won't let you down. Everything's going to be all right, Joe said calmly. The limo swept through the palace gates and into the courtyard where the two soldiers saluted as they went by. The car slowed to a halt. Trumpet players began a fanfare and footmen and butlers lined up outside the front door. Welcome to the palace, Prime Minister. I'm Simpkins, said a bespectacled man, opening the car door for them. Look, Jenkins, the palace has got someone just like you, Joe said, smiling. I'll see you back at Downing Street, sir, Jenkins said, shaking his head. Behave, and don't be surprised if she's not what you expected. She can be a little, eccentric at times. Eccentric? What do you mean? Joe called after Jenkins, but it was too late. The limo was already speeding off back towards Downing Street. The Queen is ready for you, Prime Minister. Simpkins led them to a huge pair of doors. Her Majesty will see you now. Joe took a deep breath and went in, followed by AJ. Shh! Joe looked at AJ in alarm. Where was the voice coming from? Slowly, from behind the curtain, emerged the Queen, on a pair of roller skates. She had curlers in her hair and a huge catapult in her hand. She pulled back the elastic and twang! The shrill noise sliced through the room. The pellet shot through the window. Bloomin' pigeons coming round here nibbling on my nuts. Those are for real birds, she yelled at a flock of startled pigeons. Ha! Got you, you flying little rat. The Queen put her catapult down, satisfied. Who are you? Have you come about the moles? She asked, looking Joe up and down. No, you're... Joe couldn't remember the rules. Something about jam arms. No, your Queeniness. I'm the Prime Minister. Oh, of course you are. My mistake. Come here and let's high-five. Much more exciting than those boring old handshakes, wouldn't you say? The Queen gave Joe a high-five and AJ a fist bump. Now, I guess you know why you're here, so it's time to tell me what's going on in the world. You'll be the 9th Prime Minister I've worked with, and I'll be honest, most of them are idiots and the rest are plain weird. The Queen shot across the room on her skates backwards, pulling back her catapult and taking another shot out of the window before skating round the table back to where she had started. Got you, you little stinker! She yelled happily. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. Most of them are weird, but you, my lad, I like you. Wow. Thank you, your... Joe smiled. Queeniness? Yes, your Queeniness. Well, I have a few plans for the country to keep people happy. Dressing up every week, swimming pools on trains, reopening parks, that sort of thing. Quite right, my lad. But what about this Crump person? The Queen asked sincerely. She seems terribly grumpy and quite rude, and I'd watch her back if I were you. Oh, I dealt with her. She won't be any trouble, Joe said confidently. Really? Sometimes one thinks one's dealt with a problem and it comes back to bite one on one's bum. The Queen grabbed Joe's hand and looked into his eyes. Do you know how I know? Years of diplomacy? Your Queeniness? Decades of talking to prime ministers and world leaders? Oh no, dealing with those blooming pigeons. She laughed. Good morning, I'm Cuthbert Dwibble, and this is the news. You may well be wondering why I'm wearing a tiara and a leather miniskirt. Have I gone bananas? No, of course not. I am Wonder Woman. Well, it is Thursday, so that can only mean one thing. It's Fancy Dress Friday, one of the many new laws that our new Prime Minister, Joe Perkins, has introduced. We're joined by Charlie James outside Downing Street. Over to you, Charlie. Excellent costume there, I see. You've come dressed as a homeless person. Actually, I didn't have time to find a fancy dress costume. These are just my clothes, but thank you anyway, Cuthbert. Thanks a lot. Yes, that's right. It's Joe Perkins' first month in charge and what an impact he's made. It's like waking up in a different country, and not just here, all over the world. There are reports of fancy dress days breaking out across the globe. It seems that the Prime Minister can't do any wrong. I caught up with him and got a few words earlier. Joe burst out of number 10, cowboy hat on and swinging a lasso. Yee-haw! He yelled. Charlie James pushed the microphone right up to Joe's nose. Prime Minister, how have your first few days in charge been? Well, I sure am glad you asked me that, partner, Joe said in his best cowboy voice. It's been pretty rootin' tootin' good. I feel like I'm getting a... No, it's no good. I can't keep the accent up. Handle on things. Joe finished his sentence in his normal voice. I've introduced a whole host of new laws to make Britain fun again. I'm getting serious about silliness, Charlie, and I'm not afraid to take on big issues affecting people in their everyday lives. I'm introducing a new law that gives everyone a free ice cream on hot days, as well as fast-tracking my Hats for Cats scheme. Hats for Cats? What's that? It's basically putting hats on cats, Charlie. Don't need to overthink that one. Not only do cats look good in hats, but it also rhymes, which is very pleasing. Prime Minister, can you confirm rumours about clogs on frogs or gloves on doves? Another reporter jumped in. All in good time, Joe smiled. What about the park? I mean, that was the whole reason you got into politics in the first place, Charlie asked. I can confirm the park will be reopening in a few days. We're going to have a special ceremony and a surprise guest to open the whole thing. Joe grinned. AJ emerged from number 10, dressed in glasses, a grey wig and a pink tie. Ah, here's my partner now, Joe said, attempting the accent once more. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have to pay a visit to my old school. It's the first teacher-child swap day, and I want to see it for myself. Joe and AJ headed for the car. Jenkins was already waiting inside, holding a stack of papers for Joe to sign. Excellent costume, AJ. Let me guess. Charles Dickens? Joe said, climbing in. No! AJ shook his head. The Duke of Wellington? No! The man who invented the steam train, Robert Louis Armstrong? Wrong again, said AJ. Ridiculous spotty tie, old-fashioned clothes, strange little glasses. No, I give up, said Joe. I've come as Jenkins. Ha! Of course, I see it now. I beg your pardon? Jenkins exclaimed. I do not dress like that. You sort of do. It's a good look. I mean, you just don't see it enough men in pink spotty ties anymore. It's tragic, really, Joe said kindly. I might start dressing like this every day from now on, AJ said, checking himself out in the rear-view mirror. Anyway, where's your costume, Jenksy? Why aren't you taking part? Actually, sir, I am taking part. The more discerning observer would notice that I usually wear a Windsor knot in my tie. Well, not today. I've gone for the far more relaxed standard variation. No one can accuse me of being a stick in the mud, Jenkins said, with an air of triumph in his voice. Quite so, Jenkins, quite so, said Joe, sharing a smile with AJ. Joe gently tapped the glass that separated the driver from his passengers. To St. Peter's School, Stevens. Time's getting on. Sorry, Prime Minister, the traffic is chaos. We'll never make it through London at this rate. Nothing I can do, your PM-shipness. Oh, man, Joe said, slumping down in his chair. If only we had jetpacks, AJ muttered as he stared out of the window. Yes. If only. Jenkins said to no one in particular. There was something about his voice that stuck in Joe's ear. Something about the way he sat on his hands that alerted AJ. They both looked at him. Jenkins? Joe asked suspiciously. Yes? Jenkins asked innocently. Anything I should know? No, absolutely not. We definitely don't have any jetpacks at number 10. We do have jetpacks, don't we, Jenkins? Oh, Jenkins let out a desperate sigh. Yes, but they're for emergencies only. No Prime Minister has ever used one. It's not the polite way to get about, sir. Far too noisy and extravagant. Joe bangs his fist on the window to the driver. Stevens, turn the car around. From now on, Jenkins, Joe leaned in, I shall only ever travel by jetpack. AJ whooped and Jenkins wept into his spotty tie. A few minutes later, all three of them were strapped in and ready to fly. Joe had stuck a crash helmet over his cowboy hat, and AJ and Jenkins looked like intergalactic father and son spacemen in their matching suits and goggles. Let's fire them up on 3, 2, 1, go! Shouted Joe, and with that, all three of them rocketed into the air from the back of Downing Street. Prime Minister on a jetpack! Yelled one passerby. Joe looked down and gave a salute. It was an amazing feeling seeing London disappear under their feet, and within seconds the whole place looked like a miniature model village, filled with toy cars and tiny robot people all crawling around in fancy dress. Joe turned to Jenkins, who still hadn't opened his eyes. How do you fly one of these things? How on earth should I know? Jenkins yelled, eyes still tightly closed. I thought you knew everything, Joe yelled back. Suddenly, the ground seemed very far away. Do I look like a man who flies around on a jetpack a lot? Do I? I'm nearly 63 years old. I feel dizzy if I get out of a chair too quickly. The closest I get to extreme sports is doing my tie in a slightly different way. So why on earth would you think I know how to fly a jetpack? Relax, you two. AJ looped the loop around them. It's easy. This lever is for forwards and backwards. This one's for up and down. And with that, AJ zoomed off again, determined to write his name in the sky. After a moment of uncertainty, Joe and Jenkins began to get used to being in the air. Hey, this isn't so bad, is it? Joe called to Jenkins. I suppose not. Jenkins opened one eye and looked around. Just as long as we keep an eye out for any jumbo jet! AJ yelled, just as a Boeing 747 coming into land flew within what felt like inches of their head. Skyhogs! The pilot yelled, shaking his fist at the three of them. Oops! Sorry, Prime Minister! The pilot apologised, realising who he'd almost run over. No, my bad, Joe smiled. I think we'd better head down. Look, I can see our school below us. Last one down's a plop. Chapter 11. School's out. After circling the school field a couple of times, they landed with all the grace of a swan landing on a still pond. Well, one of them did. Joe crash-landed into a bush and Jenkins landed in a tree with the style of a cannonball. One moment, Jenkins, we'll get you down, Joe said, staggering upright and pulling off his crash helmet to reveal what can only be described by some as spectacular helmet hair. Oh, leave me, sir. You two go on, Jenkins muttered breathlessly. I'll just stay here and have a rest. It'll give me a chance to reflect on where my life went so wrong. Right you are. We'll be back in an hour to take you home. Try not to get eaten by squirrels. By now, a large crowd of pupils had gathered in the school field, and Joe and AJ were greeted like rock stars. Joe held his arms aloft in an attempt to quieten the crowd. Fellow kids of the world, as you know, this is an important day in the history of our country, a day in which you get to be in charge of the teachers. We get to show them that having fun is as important as doing lessons. Good luck, comrades, and let the entertainment begin. It was hard to believe that only a few days ago Joe was too shy to even put his hand up in class. Now he was talking to hundreds of people without even thinking about it. Joe couldn't work out if he'd changed or if this was the real him. Mr. Brooks came scurrying into the field with a look of wild terror in his eyes. Ah, Prime Minister, how wonderful for you to join us on this special day, Mr. Brooks said with a forced smile. You're just in time for... In fact, what are we doing today? Have you asked your pupils? That is kind of the point, said Joe. No. Oh, what a good idea. Mr. Brooks's sarcasm dial had been turned all the way up to 11. Any suggestions about what to do today? AJ shouted to the pupil. We can make stink bombs in science, one boy shouted out. Excellent, Joe smiled. How about reading comics in English? A girl yelled. Brilliant. And what about this morning? Joe asked. We normally have PE, Mr. Brooks said. Then, oops, realising it was probably a mistake to open his mouth. Even better, Joe grinned. How about a game? Teacher versus pupils. What shall we play? Football, someone yelled. No, netball, someone else shouted. No, cricket, another said. That settles it. We'll have a game of soccer net cricket ball. Everyone apart from Mr. Brooks cheered madly. But I don't have my games kit, Mr. Brooks said. Joe and AJ shot him a glance. No, Mr. Brooks protested. It's undignified. You know the rules, Joe shrugged. 10 minutes later, the entire teaching staff were on the field. There was Mrs. Sanderson, the elderly home economics teacher, Mr. Pop, the eccentric maths teacher who blinked and grinned in the bright sunshine as though this was the first time he'd ever been on a sports field in his life, and Mr. Peters, the PE teacher, who was busying himself doing all kinds of complicated stretching exercises. They were all dressed in what could be scavenged from the lost property box, all except Mr. Brooks, who had been made to do PE in his pants and vest. At either end of the field there were 2 netball hoops, and in between them 300 very excitable students. AJ had assigned himself referee. Are we ready? AJ yelled. But what are the rules? Mr. Brooks asked. I don't know, AJ smiled. But you're the referee. Surely there must be rules. Everyone needs rules. Rules are good. Rules are safe. I'll just start and see what happens, said AJ, grinning and wiggling his eyebrows up and down. I hate this game already. Mr. Brooks sighed. AJ raised his arm and blew his whistle. Beep! Joe ran from the middle of the field with the ball and charged towards the net, screaming at the top of his voice. Wah! Handball! Mr. Brooks yelled. Yellow card! AJ shouted. Ha! Yellow card to you, Mr. Brooks. What for? Telling the ref what to do. Any more of that and you'll have to do a forfeit. Meanwhile, Joe was hurtling towards the net and the ball tucked under his arm. He had his mind on only one thing, a hoop goal. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, a blur flashed towards him. The next thing Joe felt was the air being forced from his lungs as he was knocked to the ground in a heap. Mrs. Sanderson, a woman who must have been in her 70s, had full-on rugby tackled Joe, causing him to spill the ball. In your face, she screamed at Joe before walloping the ball upfield. I mean, hard luck, Prime Minister. Good tackle, Mrs. S, Joe smiled, pulling himself to his feet. The ball hurtled towards Mr. Brooks. He was just about to hit it with his cricket bat when he looked up and noticed 300 of his students charging his way. Mr. Brooks gulped and closed his eyes as every boy and girl in the school, as well as a few teachers, piled on. There was a muffled cry of, "Don't hurt me," as Mr. Brooks disappeared under a mountain of bodies. AJ blew his whistle sharply and waved his arms about a lot. Finally, Mr. Brooks emerged, looking dazed and confused. Orange card! AJ yelled at the head teacher. What did I do this time? Mr. Brooks said, spitting grass out of his mouth. Inciting violence and, offside. Oh, this game is stupid. Purple card for being rude to the game. Forfeit time, AJ smiled. You'll have to run around the outside of the field singing I'm a Silly Sausage for 20 minutes. Mr. Brooks finally snapped. He broke the cricket bat over his knee and stormed off around the field. 30 minutes now, AJ yelled. There's an extra 10 points deducted for being mean to a cricket bat. Violetta's home was on the other side of London, in the bleak part of the city. It was on the sort of street where no one goes after dark, where it's cold and lonely, and the only sounds are people walking quickly away. This was where Violetta was happiest, a place where she could be alone with her grisly thoughts. Violetta sat on a warm armchair in her lounge. The curtains were drawn and the only light came from the blue glow of the huge bank of TV screens fixed to the wall in front of her. Each one beamed news from around the world, and they all had Joe's face on them. He was now the most famous boy in the world. Violetta reached for a bottle on the side table and poured herself a large scotch. The very sight of Joe made her skin scratchy with rage. Why wasn't she on every TV channel in the world? Why wasn't it her who everyone wanted to be seen with? Why? It was like a stuck record spinning round Violetta's head. She turned up the volume on one of those screens to drown out the questions whirring around in her brain. The new Prime Minister's been at it again, this time at his old school, the news reporter was saying. He took his time out from his busy schedule to bring laughter and silliness to the pupils of St. Peter's, as well as invented a new sport. In a couple of days, the park that Joe Perkins wanted to save is going to reopen, bigger and better than before. Violetta pressed pause and rewound. Silliness! And again, silliness. It was all too much for her to take, and then she grabbed the first thing she laid her eyes on and threw it at the bank of TVs on the wall, causing it to implode with a loud pop and shattering of glass. Drat! Violetta screamed, realising she'd once again destroyed her phone. I can't take much more of this. I need a plan. I need to teach Perkins a lesson. I need to end this silliness now, she muttered, fiddling with the brooch on her blouse. Suddenly her eyes lit up. She grabbed a pen and paper and began to scribble frantically. I'm going to need a sharp pin, a fake dog poo, a set of screwdrivers, some wire cutters, banners, a few placards, and a legion of miserable people. She laughed to herself. Sometimes I scare myself. I'll give you a grand reopening that you won't forget, Perkins. The final score was teachers 234 runs v pupils 60, 65. 6-2. Man of the match, or rather woman of the match, went to Mrs. Sanderson, who scored 4 conversions and took 5 wickets and tackled like a woman possessed. Jenkins, who had been watching the whole game from up the tree, clapped both teams politely. Excellent, Prime Minister, Jenkins said as Joe and AJ helped him down. Just then, the sound of screeching tyres pierced the air and the Prime Ministerial car pulled up in a cloud of smoke. Prime Minister, I'm afraid you're needed, Stephen said, winding down his window. I've come to escort you to the airport immediately. Jenkins turned his phone on and scrolled through a bank of messages urgently. His tone was serious. It's awful news. It looks as though the world may be on the brink of war, and you may be the only person who can stop it.